So the purpose of this week's class is to look at the Lookup Manager. I've bunged a little shortcut to the Lookup Manager in my favourites, but it can be accessed generally from the Administrator tab as well. I'm logged in as the Administrator user, and that's significant because I'll show you what happens later on if you don't have access rights to the Lookup Manager. So I'll start off in Sample Manager. I hope. Here we go. So if I create a new record, when you're creating a new sample record, you can look up various values. So if I was to look up material, it gives me a list of my available materials. Similarly, if I look up batch, it shows me batches that might exist. I'll bung that one on there. So most of the things in sample look up from other data, other entered data like materials and customers and projects and that sort of thing. However, there is one field on here which comes from the lookups, which is location. So if I click on location, this is actually a list of values that have been created specifically to populate this field, and they're user enter valued. So this is actually a storage location by the look of it. So we've got cabinet, disposal, freezer, sort of where you might put your samples. And this doesn't mean that there's an application somewhere called location into which you've created all of these. Someone's just used the lookup value and created a pick list. So obviously this is a sort of generic list, but it could be values that are relevant to your lab or your office, in fact your whole company. But if this looks up from a lookup and you've got rights to the Lookup Manager, at the bottom there's a little button down here, Manage Lookup Values. So if I click on that, it will open the Lookup Manager directly. And it doesn't actually open it focused on the lookup we were looking at, which was storage location. But if I scroll down, there's storage locations. You can see most of these have got a reasonably user-friendly name, so you can figure out what they are. So if I clicked on storage locations, you can see this list here seems to match what was popping up in my lookup in the Sample Manager. So if I choose to add a new one, so I'll click on plus, I'll create cabinet 4, save my changes. If I go back to the Sample Manager and click on location again, cabinet 4 has now been added to the list. So managing it from within where your lookup's being accessed from, if I clear that and go again just to recap, if you go from the Sample Manager, for example, you know it's coming from a lookup if you've got access rights to manage lookup values, because this button appears, and if you click on the button, I may as well select that again. If you click on the button, it manages the Lookup Manager, and then this allows you to edit your values in here. So I might decide that I didn't actually want cabinet 1's broken down, been scrapped, doesn't exist anymore. So you can highlight that and just delete it, and off it goes from the list. So again, if I click in here and look it up, you can see cabinet 1 is now conspicuous by its absence. So it's quite simple from there. So if I close Manage Lookups again, if I go back to Home, let's go from here. I may as well save my new sample. It knows I've made changes and haven't saved them. Okay, so I've got a shortcut to Lookup Manager. So I'll click on Lookup Manager. It launches it. It looks exactly the same as it does if you launch it from the application. So let's have a look at some of the other values that look up in here. So for example, you'll notice I've got Manage Methods open in the background. So if I load some records, let's have, I don't know, duplicate method. One of the other things that looks up from the Lookup Manager, which I think is significant, if I click on here, is the limits. If I click on limits, I'll just close that, and I'll say I wanted to add a new limit. Click on name. This list of limits, the list of names that are available, that comes from the lookup values again. So if I ignore that for now and go into my manage lookups, that is all parameter limit name. So I guess if you didn't know what it was called, I know it's called parameter limit name. If you typed limit into the search, it'll filter it down, and then that list of values you can compare to what you've got in your method manager and go, aha, that must be the correct one. So they've tried to name these classes of lookup in plain English to make it easy to spot them, but one or two of them might be a little bit obscure, or you might be looking under L for limit and not realize it's parameter limit name. So it's the same as before, so we can manage our limits in here. So we've got upper detection limit, lower detection limit, and detection. So if I wanted to get rid of one, I just click on the minus, save my changes, and that gets rid of it. And if I want to add a new one, I don't know what we've got in there actually. You know what, we have a new Allison limit, I think. Oops, I didn't add it. Well, that's interesting, it calls it new record. Ha ha ha. Right, I'm going to go out again and in again because I've made a bit of a mess of that, because I clicked cancel rather than save. Lookup Manager. My clicking's not so good today. We can filter to find our limits. The one I deleted is gone, so we can add a new one. We'll call it Alison's limit. I better delete that again afterwards, I guess. Continue, save changes, and then if we go to manage methods, plus, that will now appear in there. So it's what you can't do in here is you can't highlight one and edit it. So if you find a typo or you wanted to replace one, I better delete that one, you have to actually delete it and then recreate it in the form that you want it. Right, one more thing to show you in here. I'm currently logged in as the admin user. If I log out, oops, if I click on the right menu it would help, log out of Qualoupe, and I log back in again as me, my user in Qualoupe is not an administrator, so I don't actually have the rights to use the Lookup Manager. You see, I haven't got the admin tab, and the roles that I've got don't include the Lookup Manager. So if I go to the sample manager in here, create a new record, and click on location, you can see I don't have the button labelled manage lookup values. I can only choose from the existing values. So in other words, as an administrator, you might want to create the list of values and you might want to manage the list of values, but as a day-to-day user, you don't want people inventing their own values. You want them to look up from the list that you've provided for them. So if they don't have the rights to the Lookup Manager, that button's just missing and they can't see the Lookup Manager, so they have no choice but to choose one of the values that are provided to them. So I think we've just about covered that. In an upcoming class I'm going to look at some of the other lookups from sample, things like project, and how you can use that to help you rationalize and organize your samples. But the purpose of this one was just specifically to look at the lookups. So I'll click on stop recording, and if you've got any questions I'll answer them in a moment.